Well, let's speak to the artist Sally Grumbridge, the daughter of George Edward Milner Porter, who was a Far East prisoner of war from 1942 until Japan's surrender in 1945. Thank you for bearing with us, Sally, and it's great that you're back on the show again. We had problems earlier. But just tell us your dad's story.
Well, he was, George Porter was a bombardier in the 135th Royal Artillery. The regiment left the shores of the UK and travelled to Singapore, arriving in January 42. They fought on the mainland of Malaya and then defended Singapore and, of course, became captive on the 15th of February 42. He was then a prisoner for 3.5 years, first in Singapore, then in Thailand on the Thai-Burma Railway and at the base camp for the bridge on the River Kwai, and finally moving to Nong Pladuk and then Ubon province for the end of the war.
How much did you, you've very well researched, but did your father tell you all of this, or is this a story that you've had to learn down the years?
I pieced together the dates, so they were all written in a little journal that he had, and which I only discovered about 20 years ago. So he'd marked the dates, but I always knew he was a prisoner of war. He used to talk to my sister and me about just amusing stories. He always masked these stories in a light-hearted way. But as we were growing up, we certainly knew he was a POW. We knew some of the stories, how he stole eggs and how they had to count to 10 in Japanese for roll call, little things like that. But it was only really the detail that I discovered after his death.
Now, you've travelled to the Far East. Tell us why you did that and what you found.
Well, it was following the discovery of the memorabilia from the wartime that I felt a need to find out more about his story. My daughter was travelling, and in 2004 I met up with her in Bangkok, and we went to Kanchanaburi and saw the bridge on the River Kwai and travelled up the railway to Hellfire Pass. It was an amazing journey, not only from the historical research, but just being in the place that they had been and experiencing the climate and the landscape and everything. It was amazing.
What did you find in terms of the locals in these places? How did they live with their past history, or what had taken place there?
I think Thailand in particular was quite an unusual country in that it was in a funny place compared to some of the countries that have been colonized by the Japanese. I did meet one amazing woman who had lived in Kanchanaburi during the war and showed me the gunshot wounds, and she talked about it through an interpreter. But most of the people we met were younger and really were just involved in the tourism that's developed in that part of the world now as a result of the railway.
Well, this side of your history, I understand, has been transformed in the pieces of art, some of which we can see behind you. What led you to do that? Why art?
Well, I'm an artist, so it's my means of communicating, and I was so blown away by the landscape and the beauty of Thailand, and later on when I visited Singapore, that I wanted to put into paint try and translate the feelings that I had with the landscape, and also use items of the memorabilia to make a series that told my father's story in a different way to all the amazing books that had been written and the memoirs. So it was just my way of making a mark really for him.
Well, you will know this. This is known as the Forgotten War. They were the Forgotten Army. Yes. Why is today important to you, and the story of what took place in Burma? Why is it important that it keeps being told?
It is an integral part of the Second World War. The war in Europe was horrendous, as was the war in the Far East. Obviously, I have a personal connection, so telling my father's story enables me also to tell the story and keep the memory alive of all those tens of thousands of prisoners and civilian captives and the other not just the Westerners, but also the people who suffered in the Far East as a result of conflict.
Sally, obviously you were a child when he came home, or when he returned. He passed away in 1979. But in terms of the relationship with your mother, we hear a lot about what used to be termed shell shock, which we now know as PTSD, a very serious condition. Did your mother ever talk about what it did to their relationship, returning from war?
Well, our case was slightly different in that he was single. And he met my mother after the war, and I was born after the war in '52. But he was definitely a damaged man. He had been a very gregarious, outgoing person, and although he still maintained a lot of his former character, we all knew that he was having nightmares. We all knew that he had terrible neurological problems and illnesses. And he drank very heavily, and I think he was very damaged. And my mother outlived my father by 30-odd years, but I know that it was a difficult marriage, even though they met and fell in love after he came back.
Well, an absolute tribute to what he's contributed to this country, what you're telling us, and how you're expressing it through your art. So Sally Grumbridge, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.